One of the key elements of 360 video on YouTube is spatial audio. The ability to have an audio image that moves with you, just like with 360 video, you can look around. You want the capability of the audio to represent different directions. And to do that, you need Ambisonics audio. So we're going to dive in and talk about everything you need to know about how to mix audio for YouTube VR, how to edit it with a video, then how to apply metadata and upload it so that you can get the full spatial audio experience on YouTube in your 360 videos on YouTube. So this is actually the third of a three-part series. I did two previous videos with Martin Rieger of VR Tonung talking about pre-production and production for spatial audio for YouTube VR. So now we're actually going to dive in and take a look at how you actually mix all of this and how you do all of the post-production mixing and so forth. To kind of break this down, I have a graphic that I created that kind of shows you how this all works, because it can be a bit confusing at first. So kind of the core thing to understand here is that what we're uploading to YouTube is Ambisonics B format. That's a 4-channel audio format that represents audio from all directions. I have a video explaining Ambisonics if you want to know more, but again, the basic idea is we have 4 channels that, with a matrix, represent audio from all directions. Now the key thing is that Ambisonics is an encoded format. And what that means is that we can't just take Ambisonics audio and play it back and listen to it. We have to actually decode it to our particular layout. Now for YouTube spatial audio, that conversion, that decoding is done on the consumer end. So typically that's to a binaural format, but occasionally in certain cases it can be a surround sound output, 4-channel surround output. But that's all done on the consumer end. So what we deliver to YouTube is the 4-channel Ambisonics. So I have this graph here, and I'll break down. We can kind of see first our output. We have our master bus, which will be a 4-channel Ambisonics bus. Then we have our mix output. Again, this is the 4 channels encoded Ambisonics format. But again, we can't listen to Ambisonics on its own, so we also have to monitor, and this is done using the Google Resonance Audio Monitor VST. And this is a plugin that will take the 4-channel Ambisonics and convert it into a 2-channel binaural format, which we can listen to. So this will be just for monitoring. This will be so we can listen to the mix and hear what the mix will sound like when it's delivered to the consumer. But on our end, we'll need to disable this before we upload, because we're not uploading this 2-channel audio, we're uploading the original 4-channel Ambisonics. So this is just for monitoring. Now if we get to this, you can see, again, all of this is in that 4-channel Ambisonics B format, so we've got a number of different formats that we're working with. So for starters, we have an Ambisonics microphone source. So an Ambisonics microphone, when you record the raw output of an Ambisonics microphone, it has 4 microphone capsules, at least a first order mic does, and those 4 capsules are organized in what's known as a tetrahedral array. That's not too important. The important thing to know is that that raw recording from the microphone is considered A format, and we're working with B format. So we need to convert that. And there's a number of tools to do that. Most microphones, Rode, Sennheiser, a number of others who make Ambisonics microphones sell, or not sell, but actually give you plugins to do the conversion from A to B format. So in this case, we're using the Ambio A to B converter, which will take that A format recording and convert it into B format that we can listen to. Now we also have our dialogue bus. So we have a mono dialogue track. So we need to take that dialogue and we need to convert it into a format that can be interpreted in Ambisonics. So to do that, we're going into our dialogue bus, and then we're using the IEM stereo encoder. I'll talk more about what this tool is a little bit later, but essentially we're taking a tool that allows us to take this mono dialogue element and place it in a particular spot in the Ambisonics sound field. So it allows us to spatialize that sound. Now we're doing the same thing with our sound effects bus, where in this case we're using IEM multi-encoder, which again I'll show you all this later on, but that actually has a the ability to encode a bunch of sources, so we can put in mono sound effects, we can put in stereo sound effects, those get routed, and then this IEM multi-encoder will take that and it will convert it, again, spatialize it, just like with channel-based or object-based audio, you pan stereo and mono sources around. This allows us to pan those sources around and, again, put it into that Ambisonics format. Now we're also going to use, we have an Ambisonics recording. This recording is actually in B format. We're going to convert it to mono and then convert that mono source back into Ambisonics to kind of show you what that looks like. That might not make sense. You might be like, why would I want to take Ambisonics, then go to mono, and then go back to Ambisonics? But it'll make sense once we actually look at the session and I show you why you would want to do that. Now we also have ambience, so in this case ambi is standing for ambience, not ambisonics, but this ambi bus has H3VR recordings, so these are recordings that I did that are in Ambisonics B format already, so because they're in Ambisonics B format we can just slap them in there and they can route straight to our bus and they'll be interpreted properly because they're already in the right format. And then lastly, we have music. So again, we're taking a stereo music track. In this case, rather than using one of these encoders, we're actually using Pentio, which is a plugin I've done videos on the past. It's an upmixing tool. And again, once we get into the session, I'll break down why exactly we're using Pentio versus an encoder. But it's another way of taking a stereo element and then kind of up converting it into Ambisonics so that we can get that full kind of spherical sound field. I'll kind of zoom out so you can get an overall view. Again, the basic idea, we're taking stereo mono elements, converting them into Ambisonics B format, and then we're combining them all together, and then we also need to monitor that, and that's what we're using Google Resonance Audio for. Pretty basic what a typical workflow for an Ambisonics mix would look like. With that, I think let's break down what plugins we need. Oh, I should add one more thing before we get to that. I also have a reverb bus. I'll show you this once we get into the session, but that's not in this graphic. The reverb bus is 5.1, and so we have an encoder that's taking 5.1 into Ambisonics. But again, I'll show you that once we get into the session. But let's talk about what tools we need to do this. So first, we're using Reaper as our DAW. Reaper is a really good DAW. It's very affordable, and it's also great. It has a ton of features that make it really, really useful for immersive audio and Ambisonics specifically, so I highly recommend it. You can use any DAW, Cubase, Pro Tools. If you have the higher priced versions of those, you can use those to mix Ambisonics. The key thing is, because we're using first order Ambisonics, that requires each track to have 4 channels, so you need a DAW that supports at least 4 channel tracks. But beyond that, you can use pretty much anything. We're going to be using a few plugin toolkits. So one of them is IEM. I'll link all these in the description. But IEM is a free toolkit that has a ton of Ambisonics tools, all available as VST plugins you can use in any DAW that supports VSTs. So it's really, really handy, really powerful, and again, it's free. We'll also be using O3A Core by Blue Ripple Audio. O3A Core is a free plugin suite. Blue Ripple has some paid plugins, but we're just going to be using the free ones. Again, they're available as VST and I think Pro Tools and Logic plugin formats as well that let you work in all of those DAWs. And again, it has a bunch of cool tools, free. There's some paid ones if you want, but we're just going to use the free ones. And then also ATK, or the Ambisonics Toolkit. Ambisonics Toolkit is a series of plugins, also free, also great. But it's rather than being a VST, it's actually in a Reaper specific format, so it only works in Reaper, but it's free. So if you are in Reaper, it's a great toolkit to have, and there's some useful tools in there that you can use for Ambisonics mixing. Going beyond just the free tools, we'll also be using Pentio. Again, I have a video on Pentio. It's an upmixing tool. It's not free, but it's really powerful. It has some really cool features. You don't need it, but if you're going to be doing a lot of this stuff, it can be really useful, and there's a lot of things it can do for you. We'll also be using Resonance Audio Monitor. Again, that's a plugin made by Google that uses the same spatial rendering chain as YouTube does, so it lets us monitor and hear what it'll sound like on the consumer end. So that's a really powerful tool, and again, a free plugin you can download. And then we'll be using Premiere Pro to put everything together because it's a really popular video editor. It has the features we need, and it also has some of the metadata stuff we need. So you can use any video editor, but it needs to support 4-channel audio. And Premiere Pro is nice because it does support 4-channel audio, and it also supports metadata injection, which we need. Once we upload to YouTube, YouTube will read the metadata, and it needs to read that metadata to recognize the video as 360 and recognize it as spatial audio. If you don't have Premiere Pro or you don't have a way to inject metadata, Google also has a free tool called the Spatial Media Metadata Injector, and that metadata injector just takes the files, puts in the right metadata so that when you upload it to YouTube, YouTube will correctly read it as 360 video and spatial audio. So we'll look at that all at the end. But now let's go in and actually dive into our session and how we take our session, put it together, and then actually mix and create our spatial audio mix. So one last thing to point out before we dive into the session, typically Ambisonics audio on YouTube is converted to binaural so the end user can listen to binaural. To fully experience, you need headphones, and that is true for this video as well. We're going to be monitoring binaurally, so get those headphones ready. You'll need them in order to be able to properly hear the audio, so headphones. All right, so now we're in this session, so I'll just point out a few things. First, we have our video here. Reaper has a video player. If you hit Control-Shift-V, you can enable and disable that. So this lets us see what we're doing here, pretty typical. We've got our video channel here, which again, this is literally just for video playback. Our video here is in violet. And then I'll just point out the rest of the session I have kind of color-coded just to kind of emphasize what format everything is in. So we have our Ambisonics tracks are in amber. We have our mono tracks are all in mint. And then we have a stereo track here in silver, and then a 5.1 track in fuchsia. Just some fun color coding here, just so you can help see, what tracks are mono, what tracks are ambisonics, and how are we kind of putting this all together. So the first thing we'll look at here is kind of our master bus. So we've got a few things going on here. We've got a multi-band compressor. This is just doing some kind of final mastering type stuff to kind of smooth everything out. It's pretty not atypical to slap a multi-band compressor on the output of something or on the output of a bus. And that's a IEM plugin you can see. And then we have our energy visualizer. This is just a visualization. This will kind of show us where the different audio is positioned in the mix, just kind of something fun to look at. Then we've got our resonance audio monitor here. Again, this is just converting the 4-channel ambisonics into binaural so we can listen to it. And then we also just have a sound ID reference doing some headphone correction. So we'll also need to disable that when we render it. So again, Ambisonics requires 4 channels. So for Reaper, if we go in here into the route, we can set our track channels to 4. We'll need to do that for some of our other tracks. So for example, our Vox spatialize as an ambisonic, so we need to set it to 4 channels. This ambisonic source, 4 channels. So anything that's ambisonics, the track needs to have 4 channels. Which is important to keep in mind. Our mono tracks are actually technically stereo. Reaper doesn't actually support odd channel count tracks, so it's 2 channels, but it's mono. So it's just kind of a weird quirk of Reaper. And then you can also see all of these mono tracks are in track folders, so you can see they're kind of nested under these folders. So for example, all 4 of these tracks, because they're in this folder, they're being routed into this. Folders are in a few DAWs. I think Pro Tools added them. Some other DAWs have them. They're basically buses, but it's just a really easy way to visualize where the audio is and where the audio is being routed to within the track. So definitely something valuable to have. So in this case, we have our Vox, our mono dialogue track, which is then being routed into the Spatialize. So I'll just kind of show you what that's doing. So here, because this track is mono, we can do any kind of mono processing that we want. So we just have a typical dialogue chain here with some EQ and some de-essing and some compression. And these are all just typical mono plugins that we can use because our audio is in mono. We also have a send here to our reverb and then a send to our music, which I'll show you what that's doing when we get down to our music. But this is just typical. We've got a mono source. We're processing it with mono plugins. That's very standard. And then it's being routed into our track folder here, which is our 4-channel Ambisonics, and this is encoding the mono audio as Ambisonics. So we have this stereo encoder here from IEM, and the stereo encoder is basically just a panner. It takes the mono source, pans it somewhere within the audio, and then spatializes it, gives us that Ambisonics output. So actually technically it's stereo, but you can see there's a width control. So this is our left and right channel, and we can just collapse that down to 0, which treats it like a mono source, which it is. IEM doesn't have a mono encoder plugin, so we're just using this. And then you can see here we have an azimuth control. This controls our left-right direction. And then we have an elevation, which is up-down. And in this case, with the dialogue, you can see where our speaker is dead center, so we don't actually have any panning here. It's just panned straight front and center, and then it's outputting our Ambisonics. So, and then I'll just show you, we have a roll control that only does something if you're in if you're using a stereo. It pans the stereo elements around, but again, this is just a mono, so we're not going to mess with that. So we've got that, and then I'll just show you, so we've got the dialogue soloed. I'll just play back a bit of the dialogue, and I'm going to pan it around a little bit just so you can hear that movement and understand how that works.
See, your energy pirates do the following thing. Imagine your body is just this spring, and the elasticity of the spring corresponds to the regenerative power of...
Okay, so that's how that works. That's pretty much how all of our effects are being done as well, and I'll show you some of the other stuff as we get down the line. But that's kind of the core. Take a mono element, pan it, spatialize it, encode it as Ambisonics, route it to the master bus. That's how you mix in Ambisonics. So here we have an Ambisonics source. This is an Ambisonics microphone. We actually have, this is an A format. The 4 channels are separate, so these are 4 mono files, but they're actually each of the 4 channels of an Ambisonics A format recording. So I'll just show you, we have our 4-channel bus, and then each of these is routed to a separate channel in the bus. So by default, all of these would route to channels 1 and 2 in the folder. But in our routing, if we go up here, we can go that's our folder. If we go into these sub-tracks, you can see we're sending from track 1 to track 1 of our folder track 1 to track 2 of our folder track, into track 3 and into track 4. So this takes our 4 channels and puts them into 4 channels on our master folder, or our folder track here. And then again, those 4 tracks are in Ambisonics format, A format, so we've got our A to B converter. We're using the Sennheiser tool, but you can use any tool. They're mostly pretty interchangeable, although ideally you would use a plugin that is associated with that microphone. So we're not actually using the Sennheiser Ambio microphone. It's actually a different one, but it doesn't have its own tool. So we're just using the Sennheiser converter to convert from A to B format. And then in addition, we also have this O3A rotation plugin. And this is a plugin that actually allows us to manipulate the sound field. So we have this raw recording, but we can actually rotate it after the fact to give it its own positioning. So in this case, I'm going to disable this rotation. Actually, I'm just going to set this rotation back to 0 so it's not doing anything, and just play this audio so you can kind of listen.
See, your energy pirates do the following thing. Imagine your body...
It's kind of hard to hear because there's a bit of slapback echo, but you can, if you listen closely, you can tell his voice is actually a bit off to the side. It's not quite centered. So basically, this audio recording is not perfectly aligned with our original video. The video and the camera and the microphone were not perfectly aligned. So we can fix that. It's really easy. Ambisonics makes that really easy. All we have to do is just rotate it so we have yaw, pitch, and roll controls. I'm just going to manipulate the yaw and pitch so you can kind of hear how the sound field moves around as we do that, and then I'll set it where it needs to be so that his vocal is centered.
See, your energy pirates do the following thing. Imagine your body is just this spring, and the elasticity of the spring corresponds to the regenerative power of your body, of your physiological system.
Okay, so with that panning, we can now hear his voice is now center, so now this matches the video. But you can also hear this honestly doesn't sound very good. I don't really like the recording. There's a ton of slapback echo. There's a bit of ambience, but not much. It's just not super great. It's a nice reference, but I'm actually just going to replace it all. So I'm not even going to use this recording. I'm just going to mute it, and we're just going to move on, because that slapback echo is just really obnoxious, and then we're not really capturing that much ambience. We're capturing a bit of the river, the sound of the river, but that's pretty much it. So we're just not going to use that. So now here we have an effects bus, which again, we have a bunch of mono sources, which we're upmixing, or not upmixing, but we're encoding into Ambisonics. So to do this, we're using multi-encoder. And multi-encoder is cool because we can have pretty much as many channel inputs as we want. And you can see we're panning those different sources all around. So if we look at our effects tracks, our first three effects tracks are kind of this ambient sound that we're using to represent these logo, or these kind of graphics here. These graphics have a sound. So we're panning that around. You can see one is panned all the way in the back to represent this, and then we have one panned kind of left and right to represent these two, and then 4 is a sound effect that'll play right here. And you can see that's panned right there. So I like multi-encoder because it lets us kind of set this up. If you've worked with something like Dolby Atmos, you have an object view that shows you where all of the objects are at the same time. This works kind of like that. I'm doing all of the panning right here in one tool so that I can see where everything is panned. And then again, we have all of our tracks in a subfolder here. And then in order to get into each of the inputs on this multi-encoder, first we need enough channel tracks to support that. So we actually have 6 track channels for our 5 inputs, and then you can see we have set to 5 inputs. So FX1 is routed into channel 1, so it goes into input 1 here. FX2, 2, 2, 3 is routed to the channel 3 on the parent folder, which is going into input 3. So we can have as many inputs as we want this way. You can see we could go up to 6 inputs. Oops, didn't mean to do that. And then we can just route, have another track in here, route it to channel 6 on our folder, and then pan it wherever we want. And again, it's just basic azimuth elevation controls. We'll go back to 5 because that's all we need for this. So this is taking in as many inputs as you can fit, taking in all of those inputs, encoding them, and then outputting a 4-channel Ambisonics, which is just the combination of everything together as a 4-channel Ambisonics mix, which is pretty nifty. So, okay, we'll just play back that. I'm going to mute this because I'm going to show you what this is doing, and you can just kind of hear how those sands are panned around. Okay, pretty nifty. And again, you can see we have a compressor on this track. Again, this is just a typical stereo compressor, and because it's in a mono track, and then once we convert it to Ambisonics, then it's an Ambisonics format, and we can't use typical mono or stereo plugins. But in addition to these effects here, we also want to have a kind of ambient effects that represent the sound. So one of those is we have this ambi effects. So this is what we kind of talked about in the beginning, where we take an Ambisonics element, convert it to mono, and then back to Ambisonics. So in this case, let me just show you what this recording is. So this is a recording. This is already in Ambisonics B format. This is one of my recordings from the H3 VR that I've already converted. You can see the title here is actually some ambient forest recording. So let's listen to this just on its own and see what it sounds like. So kind of nifty, but the main thing I want to point out is just that all I really want from this is the sound of that waterfall. I just want kind of that water movement sound to represent the waterfall here. I don't really need anything else, so I don't want this whole big sound field. I just want an isolated element. In order to get that, I can use O3A Beamer. So O3A Beamer basically isolates a particular element from a particular direction in order to create a mono output. If you think about Ambisonics as this 3D sound field from sound from all directions, O3A Beamer is using beamforming, so it's like taking a microphone and having a microphone in that virtual ambisonic sound field to be able to point it anywhere you want and get that mono element. So we have an azimuth and elevation controls. These allow us to move our microphone around and where we're aiming it. And then sharpness controls how tight that microphone is. So if it's high sharpness, it's like a hypercardioid mic. It's very narrow defined. Lower sharpness would be more like a cardioid or a wide cardioid where it's very wide and undefined. So I'm just going to isolate this. So again, this is a 4-channel Ambisonics B format. O3A Beamer is taking in 4 channels, outputting our 1-channel isolated element, and then that's being respatialized. So in this case, that's input 5, which you can see is panned over and a bit down to represent where the river is. So I'm just going to play this back, and I'm just going to move my microphone about, and you can hear how I can kind of narrow down and capture just the waterfall. And then I'll adjust the sharpness so you can see how the sound goes from being more focused to a wider pickup. So again, that gives us our mono element, which we can then pan down to represent our river. So pretty typical mixing strategy. And now we also have our ambient effects. So this is just another Ambisonics B format recording. This is just some birds and stuff. I actually recorded this in the Ozarks. This was clearly not recorded in the Ozarks, but we're taking a bit of creative liberty here. So again, this is just a recording that's already in Ambisonics B format, so we can just take this and use it straight up. So we can also do some processing. Because it's in Ambisonics format, we have to use plugins that support Ambisonics. So we've got an EQ and a compressor here. This EQ, I'm just cutting out some of the low frequency rumble and some of the high frequency hiss that's in the recording. They're not bad, we just don't need them for this particular mix. They're kind of in the way. And then we also have a compressor. There's just some kind of abrupt, loud bird sounds, so we're just kind of compressing those to give us a more even, consistent background. And these are both in the IEM toolkit, but again, because this is an Ambisonics B format recording, we need to use plugins that support Ambisonics. Otherwise, they won't process it properly. They need to support 4 channels. So I'll just play that for you on its own. It's just got some nice birds in the background. We mostly wanted those birds, so this kind of 500 hertz to 5K is where most bird calls are most present, so we've just kind of isolated that. The recording has some distant waterfall that's got some kind of high frequency hiss and some low frequency rumble that we don't really want. We just want those birds, so that's the EQ there. So that's our ambience, and that shows you how you can take Ambisonics elements, add them in, and then you can still manipulate them. You just need the plugins that support it. Now next we're going to go over to our music. Now I want to point out, just so you can see what this is doing, this is just a mono compressor, but we've got our vocal is routed to our music track here and into the compressor, so you can see this compressor is doing sidechain compression, so the vocal is ducking the music so that the music isn't quite as distracting and isn't kind of overriding the vocal. So this is just sidechain compression, nothing special there. So we've got the stereo music, and then we're going into Pentio here, which is taking the stereo and upmixing it to Ambisonics. And you'll see this is AmbiX format. I forgot to point that out earlier, but everything we're doing is AmbiX format. With Ambisonics, there is AmbiX and FuMa. They're exactly the same. There's nothing different about them other than the order of the channels. So pretty much everything, every plugin and the format you need to upload to YouTube is AmbiX. FuMa's not quite so popular these days, but just in case you see that anywhere else, you need AmbiX format, not FuMa. And again, it's literally just what order are the channels in. That's the only thing that changes. So we're using AmbiX, and then again, we're just upmixing. And what this is doing is rather than just taking our two channels and just putting them as two channels in front of us, it's actually upmixing it so it's all around us. It's all around us, it's above us, below us, it's just totally enveloping us. Now you can see I have a stereo encoder plugin here, which is doing the same thing. I actually have it disabled right now, but it's taking our left and our right and just encoding it as a left and right in front of us. So kind of the default approach, what you might do. The problem with this, the reason why I don't like this is really twofold. First, because it's only putting the music in front of us. If I turn to the side this way, now the music is only coming from one side over here. And same way if I look the other way, the music is only coming from over here. I don't really like that. In some cases it might make sense if you want the music to kind of help focus someone's attention in a particular direction, you can do that. But in this case, I want the music to be kind of enveloping and all around us. The other reason is just for that envelopment, to make it more immersive, to really just totally put you in the scene. So to kind of illustrate that, I'm going to go back and forth between these. So we'll have Pentio, and I'll just solo my music here. I'll have Pentio, which is doing the upmixing, versus the stereo encoder. You can just hear how they sound a little bit different and how they provide their own characteristics to the sound. And I don't think either of them sound bad. They both sound fine, but it's just that Pentio, again, it just puts it all around you. It creates that really enveloping, really immersive sound field, which I really like, especially for this music. I think it works really well. And then the last thing I have here is our reverb. So you can see a few of our tracks, our dialogue track, our effects track, even our music track is sending a bit to the reverb. So this is a 5.1 reverb. We're actually using a phantom center, which actually means that it's just outputting through left, right surround. So it's actually technically a quadraphonic reverb in a way. And we're just using an exterior reverb here to kind of represent our forest here. So I'll just solo this in our vocal, and then I'm just going to turn it up just so you can kind of hear what it sounds like.
See, your energy pirates do the following thing. Imagine your body is just...
So you can hear it sounds a lot like our natural reverb that we actually captured in the spot, but it's a lot more subtle. It doesn't have this quite hard, really aggressive slap back. It's more subtle, and so it still gives us kind of that sense of being outdoors without being overpowering. So we're using this for our reverb just to kind of set everything in that outdoor scene. And again, we're using a 5.1 reverb. I did some tests in the past to evaluate if you're doing binaural, do you need a 5.1 reverb or some kind of surround reverb, or can you just get away with stereo? And what I found was the vast majority of the time, stereo is totally fine. You can use a stereo reverb. Again, you do run into the thing of you have a front, so if you turn to the side, now the reverb is only coming from one side, which is not desirable, but you can just use two stereo reverbs, have a front and a back stereo reverb. So you don't need a surround reverb. But again, for this case, I like it because YouTube does have head tracking. I don't want to turn my head and only hear reverb from one ear. That would be bad, so I'm using a 4-channel reverb. And then we're in a forest. There's not really anything above us. The reverb is coming from around us, so I'm just using 4 channels around us to represent 4 directions. We don't really need any reverb above us because in a forest, there's not really much reverb from above you. So that's kind of my reasoning behind using a 5.1 reverb. But again, you can just get away with 2 stereo plugins, but you really don't need anything more than 4 channels of reverb just for the front and back most of the time. And then again, our reverb is being routed into a spatializer. Again, we're just using multi-encoder, so our 5.1 reverb is 6 channels, which is going into 6 channels on here. And then our 6 channels are being routed. So we have our channel 1 is left, right, and we have a center which is actually hiding under our 6th channel, and then we have left surround, right surround, which using the multi-encoder, we're just panning those out to properly spatialize and properly represent where the channels are located in a 5.1 system. And then our 6 channels are LFE, which I also pan center, but no sound is coming through channels 3 or 6, so those don't matter. It's just these 4 channels representing the layout of a 5.1 system. So that's pretty much our entire mix. It's really nothing special. It's just taking mono, stereo, 5.1 elements, converting them, upmixing them, whatever we need to do to encode them into Ambisonics B format, so that we can take that 4-channel first-order Ambisonics and upload it to YouTube.
See, your energy pirates do the following thing. Imagine your body is just this spring, and the elasticity of the spring corresponds to the regenerative power of your body, of your physiological systems, because your body has constantly to be regenerating itself, and it has to regulate about all the different conditions which are happening in your life.
So now I'm going to show you how to render this all out. So the first thing is, again, we need to upload the 4-channel Ambisonics file, not anything decoded. So we need to disable our resonance audio monitor. Our resonance audio monitor is, again, converting this to binaural, which is just so we can monitor while we're mixing. So we're going to disable that. We're going to disable our sound ID reference because that's doing headphone correction. Again, someone could be listening on literally any pair of headphones, so we don't want to apply that. That's just for our own monitoring, so when we render, we're going to disable that. Then we can go to File, Render. The main thing, so we want to export our master mix. We're going to export the entire project. That's all you can kind of set on your own. Our sample rate needs to be 44.1 or 48 for YouTube's. That's what YouTube supports, so we're going to use 48 because that's a pretty typical. And then our channels, Ambisonics is 4 channels, so we need to set it to a 4-channel output. We're going to output it as a wave so that it's in an uncompressed format, and then we're going to output it as 16-bit. 24-bit if we were going to like edit this some more, 24-bit would be good. But because we're going to put this on YouTube, YouTube supports 16-bit, so that's what we're going to render it as. And then we're also going to dither and noise shape. Dithering and noise shaping, you need to do that anytime you're reducing the bit depth, which we're doing. So just make sure that's on. But the main thing, you need to make sure it's 4 channels so that we have all of our Ambisonics data represented. So now I'm going to render this out, and then we're going to jump over and I'm going to show you how to take this, put it into Premiere Pro, and then render out our video in Premiere Pro. Okay, so now we're in Premiere Pro, so it's time to actually take this and create our final mix, so a combination of audio and video. So to do that, we're going to go down here and we're going to make a new sequence. Now the easiest thing to do is use the presets, which for this version of Premiere Pro are in Legacy, VR, Monoscopic in this case. And then we have an option for 4096 by 2048, which is the resolution we're using, and then with Ambisonics audio. The main things to point out with this are our frame size and our frame rate just need to match whatever our video is. That's typically a 2:1 aspect ratio. And then for our audio, you can see we have 48K, which is pretty typical. The VR settings, this is just, again, needs to match whatever our content is. In this case, it's equirectangular and monoscopic. And this will just be written to the metadata, which I'll show you when we render this out. And then our audio tracks, we need to set it to multi-channel because these are not stereo tracks, these are 4-channel tracks. And then we set our audio tracks to adaptive so that when we import our audio, it'll read it as a 4-channel audio track. So with that, we can create our sequence. So we have here our video, so we can just drop in our video. It says it doesn't match the settings, but we actually just want to keep the settings. It does match. I think the reason it says it doesn't match is because the video doesn't have any audio, so it thinks the audio is different. I don't know, it's kind of weird and dumb, but anyway, this is the right sequence format. And then we have our audio. You can see our tracks here are adaptive 4 channels, so we take in our audio, drag this in, and if we kind of expand this out, you can see we've got, I'll just zoom in here, if I can remember how to in Premiere. There we go. we have 1, 2, 3, 4 channels of audio, so we've got all of our Ambisonics channels in here, and we know that this mix is working correctly. So now we can render it out. So we just go to File, Export, Media, and then we just need to make sure everything is set properly, which it should be. So in our video, we just need to go down to our settings and make sure video is VR is selected. This won't do anything to the video. This just writes the metadata so that when we upload it to YouTube, YouTube recognizes it as VR. And then same thing with audio. We go into audio. You may have to hit this more, but we have this option, audio is ambisonic. So again, this is just writing metadata into the video so that when we upload it to YouTube, YouTube knows that it is ambisonic. So now we can render this out and get our Ambisonics audio. So this will upload to YouTube, and YouTube will see this is a 360 video, and this has spatial audio. So we can just export from there. So if your video doesn't upload properly, YouTube doesn't see it as Ambisonics audio, or maybe you have an older version of Premiere that can't write the metadata, or you have a different video editor that can't write the metadata. Whatever the case is, YouTube has a solution. It's the Spatial Media Metadata Injector. So we've got that here. So what this enables us to do is we can just open up our video within the metadata tool, and then we can set it. So in this case, our video is spherical 360, so we'll check that. Our video has spatial audio. You can see we're in the AmbiX format, which is what we want, so we'll select that. It is not stereoscopic, it is monoscopic, so there's just one video file. And then we just hit inject metadata, and it'll save it as a separate file. So now we can see that we have a new file which it's the exact same thing, nothing has changed with the audio or video. We've just injected metadata which will properly represent what is in this file, so that when we upload it to YouTube, YouTube will see that it is a 360 video and then it has spatial audio with it. And that's pretty much all you need to do. That is mixing spatial audio for YouTube in a nutshell. So really, it's been a long video, I know, but hopefully this has shown you absolutely everything you need to know about mixing and uploading 360 video with spatial audio to YouTube. And so if so, hit that like button. If not, feel free to hit the dislike button. If you have any additional questions or comments, of course, feel free to leave those down in the comment section down below. And as always, if you want to see more videos like this, including any upcoming videos I have on immersive and spatial audio, definitely hit that subscribe button.